Thank you. We had a very small but I think fruitful roundtable on ESG data. For me, it's one of the key areas. It's sort of the foundation for a lot of the issues around sustainability and being able to understand the impact that investments can make and also understand the risks associated with climate change and the transition. So we had a lot of different views. I think one of the key things that came through was the issue around clarity. So clarity around exactly what is meant by sustainability and what is meant around ESG data. Clarity around the quality of data that is available, and trying to balance the difference, particularly when it's not potentially your full-time job, in knowing the difference between very good spin and marketing versus credible data that you can trust. The trust piece was very important in terms of if data is released, how do you know the authenticity of it? How can you really compare it to other companies? And I think that's one of the challenges that we've seen in terms of different investment funds. How do you compare when it's not really like for like? So one thing that we touched on is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the difference that might make. So in about 2 years' time, about 50,000 companies across the EU will have to publish audited, consistent and standardised data. It'll vary per sector, but there'll also be general disclosures as well. Personally, I think that's going to be a bit of a game changer in terms of the quality of data. Now, how you interpret that data is another question again, but at least everybody might be starting with the same sort of data set. We touched a lot on ratings as well and how that's often relied upon by a lot of investment managers and funds. But again, the ambiguity around how are those ratings pulled together? Can you trust the data? Do you understand the merits behind it? And I think something else that we also touched on too is what do you mean by sustainable investment and how do you rank the different elements of E, S and G? So if somebody could be very good environmentally and have a very kind of strong performance in that field, but maybe their social aspects are not as credible. So how do you balance which ones you choose, understanding that there's going to be a trade-off between those different elements? That was probably some of the highlights.
Okay, and most of those things were questions. Did you have answers to them?
Yeah, no, I think that's.
I get the point about the new regulations coming in. Like part of what we're looking for here, as well as the feedback form, is for next year's pension summit. If we're doing ESG again, how do you think it? So maybe someone from a ratings agency to actually talk about independent, accredited data that you can trust would be maybe something. Where's Marion and Hilary and so on? What I'm trying to draw from this is, where do we get the answers to these things? And generally speaking on the ESG, was it that you thought, like you can go two ways, say, this is all well-intentioned but aspirational, or the hot breath of this is on the back of your neck and you need to be up with it right now. Where would you say the centre of gravity was for your group?
I think for me it was an awareness and maybe at the initial kind of, the start of the journey. What I was slightly surprised and a little bit disappointed by, one of the first questions we asked is, who are your stakeholders? And what ESG data are they looking for? And I think in general there was a sense that people aren't really looking for the data. So in terms of
this
members,
ground up thing isn't that real.
No, and we had a colleague from Google, and I had high hopes. A young demographic that you would imagine are very kind of motivated by this. And while they are motivated by sustainability and the environment, as was touched on earlier, they're not motivated by their pensions, and they haven't linked those two elements together. And if that could be linked, that then becomes more effective. But in general, there is this demand.
The ESG communications message needs to be more pervasive in terms of saying, this is how it affects your wallet, this is how it affects your future income.
I don't hear Greta talking about pensions.
Yes, yeah. No, I think that's brilliant. Okay. So, if you're in the ESG business, you've been told. Okay. Ray, first of all, your topic had me intrigued. Well, I think it picks up really from where the panel was. Everyone over lunch was giving me a different interpretation of what the minister meant about a start date, January 1, 24. what I took from it is there will be an element of auto-enrolment in place at some point in 2024, and if she takes her foot off that pedal, it'll never happen. But will it be 100% coverage day one? Probably not. Are employers fearful of all this?
Well, I think they've just emerged or are dealing with the consequences of IORP II, which was another significant piece of pensions legislative change, and some have dealt with it, some haven't, some have will come back to it in a couple of years. Auto enrolment is going to be another very significant challenge for employers. I think around the table, probably around this room, most people would say it's a good thing. Pension savings is good, and if we can add an element of ESG, if we can combine the two, that's going to be fantastic. But there is a challenge for employers, the logistics of dealing with this, different tax dealings with occupational schemes and with the auto-enrolment system. It's going to mean that two employees sitting beside each other, perhaps on different salary levels, potentially be better off in one scheme or another. So there's going to be a lot of processing work and identifying, which and pension schemes aren't the sexiest. They really don't get people going, and they, trying to then decide. Well, we're going to decide which scheme you go into. It's going to be a real challenge for employers. So I think 2024, some raised eyebrows. Would this happen? Is there political motivation to make this happen? Absolutely. And it's to be welcomed, but I think plenty of notice in terms of its implementation, because from a basic payroll provider's point of view, from an explanation to people, whilst it's a good thing for them that their salaries are going to change, be deducted, relatively small amounts in the initial stages, is going to be a challenge. So on IORP II, we're still dealing with it. It was a game of, having hung around with actuaries too long, a game of three halves. Because there are groups who have dealt with IORP II and have adopted the requirements, but we'll probably keep it under review, and will in time may move to being one of the potentially less than 100 pension schemes. A lot of people who have moved to Master Trust, and the experience has generally been good value for money for the members of the scheme, although difficult to find out what that value for money is. And I think there's trying to open a mystery box in terms of charges, etc. So they're dealing with that. There's also a group, not to be anybody from social protection shouldn't listen now, but there's a group of people, employers have not dealt with this yet, and they tend to be the smaller, and there'll be a difficulty, and we're going to load auto-enrolment on them as well. And I don't want to steal your thunder, but we did mention kind of, again, my campaign in life, or what remains of it, is to try to make pension sexy, but it's going to be very difficult. And in terms of the impact on broader employee benefits, auto-enrolment, pensions, has brought a real focus to the role of broader benefits that you're going to talk about, and should. So pensions is part of the solution, but there will be broader implications. So I don't know if that rambled or made half sense.
I'm interested that, like, if we went to an ISME or an IBEC or a, representatives, everyone in this room is engaged with the pension process, would you find a lot more resistance? Another layer of red tape, more bureaucracy. I didn't set up my widget making business in Chewham to be ending up being, bad enough with that. I'm not getting that from you. No, everyone's on the same page this room.
I think we're on the same page in terms of whether employers, industry, etc. This is the right thing to happen. Unless, as you opened with Ivan, unless there is a deadline, it won't happen. We've been waiting around, but there has to be some sort of balance between allowing employers to make the right decisions. Some decisions that were made in terms of reacting to the IORP's legislation last year were very much, crikey, it's the end of the year, we've got to be compliant, let's do something. And some of them were probably suboptimal decisions, and some of them are going to be really difficult to reverse. So we don't want to be in that situation again.
Someone said to me over lunch, the Master Trust, that actually, the transferability of the Master Trust, that you can, that actually when you look at death benefits and look the way the assets are in the pension fund, getting out of it and avoiding a loss and going to a different one, a different master trust, is very, very difficult and full of risks. Yeah. Did that come up at all?
It didn't come up, but I think it is a reality. Again, it's back to potentially suboptimal decisions were made because of a legislative deadline, and some people moved. And it's not easy to come out of a master trust. And I think that's something the regulator needs to look at. What did come up was there needs to be value for money. That's very hard to find. What are the actual charges in some pension arrangements? And I think that in time, as the master trusts grow in scale, there's got to be more of a focus in terms of the value for money that's being delivered through them. Are they, fit for purpose any longer? And is there an exit strategy? And allowing an exit strategy that people can have free rein between the 12, 16 or 6 that might exist.
Was there a feeling that master trusts could be improved?
I think in time that they should be improved because they will be gathering most of the pension assets into the future. They could be part of the play in auto-enrollment, so the assets are going to be very significant in potentially 12 or whatever number exists. And the charges need to be looked at, and there needs to be transparency, and there needs to be a get out of jail.
And is the Pensions Authority a regulator of the
and the Pension Authority completed their first review of master trusts last year, and I think generally it was a lot done, very good, nothing really of significant note, but always room for improvement. So I think that's to be welcomed, but I think there needs to be a focus on ensuring that there is some flexibility to move between, and that constant value for money, because you could end up with 12 master trusts having the vast majority of pension assets and very little room and no real effort to move between them. That's not good for the ultimate members of the scheme.
Anything you want to add?
Make pensions sexy.
Make pensions sexy. I've been doing my best. I'm at it 8 hours. Okay. Tracy and Jacinta, in whatever sequence you like, I'm really intrigued at what you came up with, how to attract and retain talent with employee benefits. Pay them more, simple. But anyway, tell us what you came up with.
So I suppose we shared the table and we divided it in two. So I'll share some of the findings of the conversation. What struck me first was the mix of employees. There was multinationals, there was SMEs, there was owner-managed businesses, there was charities, and obviously the way and means in which they would use benefits to attract and retain talent had to be different. But actually there was a lot of commonality in terms of what they as employees deemed to be important for themselves. So in terms of one of the stats, we had done some research in Morgan McKinley and we framed that as the basis of the conversation. And one of the parts of it was that 50% of employees didn't understand their benefits, and this could be pension in terms of the differences that they would make in AVCs, stock in terms of the difference between restricted stock units. So one of the participants at the table made a very interesting point and said that they had a real mix of employees, some of which were tradespeople that didn't understand their pension. And even though the company facilitated conversations, they weren't comfortable in having those conversations. I think I would equally say we have that own experience in our own business with younger employees. We bring in the pensions advisors. And there's a challenge because as companies, you can't be seen to give them financial advice. There is a reliance on your third-party provider to come in and give that advice, but they're doing it in a landscape where they don't understand your employees or know your employees and what their motivators or drivers are. So it's a difficult one to influence. The other was the communication and constant communication of it. So there was a real variance from not sure to constant communication, and obviously there was a pressure because some of the participants were pension companies themselves, and so to be seen to have best in class offerings to their employees. The other things that we, I suppose, covered was around the cost of living crisis has now become important in the types of benefits. So we would have seen benefits before that would have cost money, and pension is seen as a cost to an individual to put in an AVC where they may have before. The cost of living crisis is impacting on that. And then we talked about at the end of it, what are the important benefits? What are the benefits that we think your organisation are offering that is retaining your employees? And this is the real leveller across the table, because independent of what the businesses were, security of work and financial security was number one, whatever they were offering by way of that. The flexibility in hybrid, it came up over and over, and again, right through to a 4-day working week, what could employers do by way of offering? This is where some of the smaller employees may have had an advantage to be able to be more agile in how they offer flexibility. The challenge that an employer that would have 50% of its employees have to be based on site versus those that didn't. How do you operate a fair benefits environment in that landscape? One of the ones that probably garnered most debate was the extra leave days. And so there was a variance of employers who offered a buyback scheme for extra annual leave days to those that offered a sabbatical, that after 5 years of service, you could have 6 weeks paid leave. And it was seen to be a real retention tool if you had those employees. 5 years is like the holy grail in the current employee landscape, where most employees are changing every 2 years, 2.5 years. At that early to mid-stage level. So that was seen as something that if they could have their dream holiday paid for and then go back and do it all again after 5 years, it may work. Pay package, and then the other thing was training and development. In our study as well, we found that in the under 25s, it was in the top 5 benefits that was valued. And that was a surprise to some at the table, because they were offering that but didn't necessarily see it as a benefit that they should or could be promoting. But obviously it's attached to pay, it's attached to benefits, because if they're invested in at an earlier stage, they're going to earn more in the longer term and become more progressive. So, pass to Jacinta.
So I had a different group. Our conversation went slightly differently. So we looked at the communication around employee benefits, answering that question about why 50% of people don't understand their benefits package and their pensions in particular. So looking at the companies that I had at the table, who are all large companies, who have strong teams who are looking after this and have really, really strong communication plans, and still say that their employees really at the end of the day didn't understand what the total package was. We came up with a couple of discussions around triggered and targeted communication. This idea that you're triggering communication at a point of time in life, whether it be maternity, whether something else is happening, and you're bringing people into discussion about what benefits are relevant to them at that time, whether it's a one-to-one financial review, whether it's looking at their career planning, what they need to do in extra health care, and having your team work that way rather than just generally communicating benefits as a one-stop shop. So we thought that was something that was really relevant at the moment, giving people what they need when they need it. The other area that we looked at was the future of work benefits, and very much like Trayc's group, 4-day working week is huge. And it's 4-day working week and getting all your work done in the 4 days. Working away for the 30 days, allowing people to go to Bali for 30 days and work there for 30 days and no impact. We're working from our kitchen desk for the last 2 years, so why can't we go to Bali? And the whole sabbatical piece came up as well. Leave policies that are targeted to what is happening in people's lives came up, something that's really, really important. So, whether we're looking at menopause leave, whether we're looking at leave for compassionate leave for an animal dying, all these different parts that are relevant to people in the moment when they need it, rather than just your benefits package being something that's stuck at the end of their offer letter. So it's making it really relevant to them. And that was probably where we left it then.
Connell spoke earlier about we have full employment, 5% unemployment. I'd love to hear that conversation if we had 15% unemployment. And it struck me when you talked about, well, there has to be a 4-day week, and so that people want jobs rather than wanting work, and they should go to RTE really. And so, but the point I'm making is that in all the things you spoke about, leave and flexibility for lifestyle in the moment of work and parenting and all that kind of thing, pensions seem to rate very low. Whereas my own life experience and advising my own kids, I'd say go away and work out the value of working in the public sector, where there still is defined benefit pensions. Like if you're a cop, you know what I mean, you get to the highest point of the pension scale quite quickly, you know what I mean, within 20 years, half a working life. And, you know, you just can't buy that type of thing. But it seemed to me the intriguing thing is that you didn't mention pensions as a critical issue, you know, of retaining staff. Would you say, in your opinion, relative to this conference, that in terms of under the heading attracting and retaining staff, pensions just doesn't feature, it's too dim and distant future?
Well, if I can say, in the survey that we did, actually pensions, healthcare and flexibility were the three most important benefits.
They were in that order? In that order.
Sorry, no, actually health insurance was number one, pension was number two. And health insurance, I think, as a result of the lifetime community rating coming in, there was a lot of younger staff that heard 2% premium for every year over 35 we'll have to pay if we don't have health insurance. Even the small amount, they felt it was a huge amount, and it could be a huge amount. So, but no, pension is always seen to be an automatic benefit, certainly from a recruitment front of house. When you're offering a package, it's, if you're not offering a pension, it seemed to be considered. But the actual, what employees are not asking as much at the younger level is, what is the percentage contribution? Yeah. So it's just, is there a pension, as opposed to what's the pension contribution? As they get older, more mature, that's a very important factor to it. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's it, thanks.
All right, so we'll move on to our last, Terence, Deacon. Both he and Maeve, who you heard earlier from Lidl or Lidl or whatever it is, are from Wexford. So really interested to hear what you know, I actually didn't understand this title. Supporting customers in their longer lives, the longevity challenge. And its implications. Shoot them, quick.
Very simply.
So what did you come up with?
Very simply, what the question was about was, while we've talked today about you having a life expectancy of 83 and me having a life expectancy of 84, our colleagues who were born after 2000 have a life expectancy of over 100. And that's what we talked about at our table is, what do...
Say that again.
Born since 2000, life expectancy of 100. Now that has a significant implication when we're talking about the 23-year-olds who won't be, or the 22-year-olds who won't be auto-enrolled. So that was what our conversation at the table was about, and we had a variety of different people at the table who contributed. The big thing that stood out, the one word that we all walked away from, was education. It's all about education, and we're all wiser now than we were when we were 22, and we know the implications and what that means for us. And when we're talking about longevity, and we're talking about will we work till 65, 70 or longer? Will we have to have a very different flexible working arrangement? Will we all be gig workers after we turn 65 and be doing consultancy or freelance or part-time jobs? Will we have left the construction industry because we won't be physically able to do it anymore? Will we have to do something else? Or will we have had enough education around pensions to put more in faster, earlier, so that through compounding we've looked after ourselves into the future and into later life? And that was really, I think, the big thing that came out of it was we need to educate much earlier. There was a suggestion that it start in schools, maybe TY is the year where you do financial. A lot of us remembered when the banks came out to the schools and we all had a Henry Hippo. Or we talked about the huge campaigns that are needed, national media campaigns that are needed to educate all of us. We all remember the guy on the bus who didn't know what a tracker mortgage was. So that was really what came out of our table was we need to educate an awful lot more. And then we talked about the responsibility of education and where that sits, maybe.
Yeah, and from the investment angle, longevity is great, as we know, or at least we think we know. But from the investment angle, it throws up both opportunities and threats, as so many things do. If you're going to live to be 90, your pension's going to have to last you a whole lot longer than it used to do. But on the other hand, you might work later in the first instance and build up a bigger pension in order to spend that in your retirement. So pros and cons on that. We did talk about the difficulty of, and it's back to the education piece, about the difficulty, particularly for people who are 65 or 70, and suddenly become masters and mistresses of their own financial destiny in managing an ARF when you arrive at that stage of your life. If somebody's been doing that for you all your life, if you've been in an occupational pension scheme, or even better, a DB scheme, but when you probably wouldn't have an ARF then unless you had an AVC, I guess. But that brings me to AVCs as well. We thought it was a notable, not a full 100% omission, but certainly it wasn't discussed much this morning in all the talk about AE and what that might look like. The big oversight is that you can't make AVCs.
Just explain to me this guy's AVCs again.
An AVC is an additional voluntary contribution. So that's why we call it AVC. It's a lot easier to say. And they are very desirable in the pensions industry. If you have an occupational pension scheme, as we've learned today and we'll have learned at other similar conferences, it only brings you so far. We don't talk about, I think, the whole adequacy question enough, which is something else that's come up today. And one of the ways you can breach that adequacy gap is to make these additional voluntary contributions on top of whatever your employer is putting in for you in the normal way and what you might be putting in the normal way. But you're not allowed. You're not allowed to make them under the A rules as they stand.
So the bit about AVCs that could have been discussed that wasn't was the AE plus AVC.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
Acronym. It's a real it's a real alphabet soup. I appreciate that, but
right.
That's.
If someone didn't have a pension and had to be regulated into having an AE, maybe they couldn't afford. Like it's a low-paid worker.
Oh well, maybe they can't, but maybe they could either.
Okay.
And AVCs don't have to come in every month out of your salary. You could be left some money or something.
It certainly is relevant to the self-employed.
It is. It absolutely is. And further along, I mean, again, around the retirement piece, a feeling that we need to get away from the whole cliff edge thing. That the day you turn 65 is a cliff edge day.
Did you speak about, because there was a lot of discussion about post-retirement benefits, how they should be drawn down versus superannuation? Did you discuss that at all?
Only peripherally, I think, in the sense that we talked about the difficulty of managing your own money in your retirement if you've never done it all your life.
It did come back again to the education piece, is that do we have the financial literacy to understand what we do have to look at when we get to 65, 70, and we do have to manage and how we're going to manage those investments or manage your ARF when it comes. And the responsibility where that sits. Does that sit then with your employer, or is it that you need to get professional advice on that? We talked about as well how for larger employers, that well-being now is more than just physical well-being. It's extended to mental well-being and financial well-being as well. And fully appreciate for small or medium-sized enterprises to take on that responsibility is difficult. But the sooner that employers can do that. The same goes back to AVCs, the education around AVCs as well. That if you're looking at a pension that's going to provide for you, or a financial plan, we had also said maybe move away from some of the language, the old language, to move into a new world and talk about retirement planning. If you're looking at your retirement plan, if you knew much, much earlier what it meant that if you had an extra few quid to put it into the AVC in your 20s before you had to draw down your mortgage, before you decided to take a break in your career for whatever reason that might be.
Before you went to Bali for a month.
Before you went to Bali. Before you went to Bali for a month. That if all that education was there much, much earlier, hindsight is 20/20 vision, maybe we can do that much earlier through education. And the responsibility for that sits probably with a lot of different people, bodies, functions.
So you didn't talk about end-of-life palliative care?
No, we didn't get into that. That might be a bit depressing.
I had to laugh about what you were saying about the guy on the bus didn't know about a tracker mortgage. When you read the central bank reports, bankers didn't know what a tracker mortgage was either.
We want to drag him out of retirement as soon as possible. We feel he has a future in the industry.
Okay.